When I was a sales girl, not yet a saleswoman, I had a knack for making something out of nothing.
Head down, hoops on, bottoms up, pop the trunk.
Thank you. Oh my God, it's the Tree Eating Girls. They're like mall royalty.
Said I wouldn't dare cross over, watch me take this hoe.
Hello.
Hello, Meredith. I'm Lara and I'm with Nerdspin. I'm so happy to be talking with you today.
Thank you for taking the time.
Of course. So, I wanted to just jump in and wanted to start with how, on the surface, the film is very playful and it can be quite hilarious at times.
hmm
But other moments are quite dark and they
hmm
show the kind of horror of femalehood that is very real and we do live with. And it really prompts you to look back and really look at the film a lot deeper. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I mean, that's the highest compliment. From the beginning, Lily Houghton, my co-writer, and I sort of said tonally we want the film to be a razor blade and a Jolly Rancher. I think that, again, like, it's such a compliment, and it makes me so happy to hear that, we wanted audiences to watch it, have a good time, and go, wait, something is off here. Maybe I need to revisit this. And I think that the confessionals are like the epitome of what hopefully those darker, vulnerable moments are for the girls. And, I was asked this question. I really liked it. It's a horror film, but there's not a traditional monster. But like if there was one, like what is the monster in Forbidden Fruits? And I'm like, expectations of women. Like I think that when you see Apple's past and her backstory, she is fierce and put together and fabulous. And then you're like, oh my gosh, girl, this is what you've been through. And all of these women have that. They all have their struggles. And, I think that women walk around in the world and they look fabulous and they can also be messy and unhinged and have problems. So I think we wanted to really lean into the duality of that with the movie.
Yeah, no, definitely that definitely came across. I really loved the movie when I was watching it the other night.
Wow,
And
thank you.
of course, and I understand that the film really has grown from Lily's original play when
hmm
you were adapting the script together. And it has such a specific tone and style to it that it's so strong and unique and it really gives it an identity. And I
hmm
was wondering if you could talk a bit more about maybe inspiration from other media that you both took from, whether it be films or other theatre.
I love that question because I think we get asked, like, what were your other film references? And I find that, obviously Jennifer's Body and The Craft and other movies, but I knew that, we watched those movies early on when we were pitching before we'd even written the script and found our home with Diablo Cody and Mason Novick, incredible producers. And then we sort of went in a different direction. I made a playlist, I built a deck. We were like on Pinterest, it was like, let's actually free ourselves from truly the expectations of ever making something as great as any of those movies, but also just like putting our own, vision and stamp onto it. And for me, like, Justine Kurland is an amazing photographer who does sort of messy, chaotic pictures of groups of women. She's got a couple different books that were extremely influential. Nan Golden, a photographer that, even though you might not watch the movie and say this looks like a Nan Golden photograph, she allows people to be messy in themselves in front of her lens. And I wanted the movie to devolve into that place by the end. And like music is such a part of my life. I'm on the like 99.99% of Spotify listeners. I'm always listening. It's like I'm probably undiagnosed ADD. But basically building a playlist, and going TLC, Natalie Imbruglia, like Sinead O'Connor, and then also modern sort of pop references like Hot and Freddie, who's in the movie. Atticus Ross and his wife Claudia have a band and they're in the movie. So I think music was really helpful to me as well to build the tone. The satire, but that gets sort of unraveled to darkness.
Yeah.
So I could go on and on about the other media references, and so I will leave it at that.
No, I love that. I find it so interesting to hear how other media can be born just purely based off inspiration and the tones of ones that came before it.
hmm
I also wanted to ask you about sort of how was it teaming up with Lily for an adaptation? sort of going from reading the play initially to then working with her to sort of turn it into film?
Yeah, I mean, we met and I prepped all this information and this pitch, and then I just was like, Mean Girls, but a slasher? And she was like, I love it, let's do it. And, come to find out, I basically met her through our shared manager, Trent Hubbard, who's a producer on the film. Like, this is his brainchild from the beginning. He was like, you need to meet. Lily wants to do something campy horror. And I read the script and I was like, oh my gosh, this would be so fun. And really, then it like pretty immediately, we would just sit across from each other and use writer duet and be writing. I'd be like, can I take this scene? And she'd take this scene. And, there's so many moments where, there's certain lines that I'm like, they're so Lily's. Like, she starts giggling and I was like, what did you write? What did you do? And she's like, you're never going to let me keep this. This is too crazy. I was like, well, now you got to read it. And it's the, do you have sand in your ass crack because you're giving Beach Babe? And we were like crying, laughing. And I was like, well, that has to stay in the movie. So I think for us, like, the collaboration really was the yin and yang of like us writing a scene and then we'd switch. And so we were both the yin and both the yang. And, having a sounding board when you're writing is so helpful. Even just like, is it funny? I think was great. And also she brought so much of her own life experience and her past to the table. When you write with someone, you share a lot of your life experiences. It's a really beautiful process.
Yeah, and it definitely comes across as a unified vision from the both of you in the end product.
Thank you.
And I also love the description you have used with promoting the film as performative sisterhood. I feel like film has a tendency to either group women friendships sort of as the ride or die perfect group or complete toxic messes. And I feel like you both really found a middle ground in those characterizations, and it felt a lot more about the consequences that occur when you pressure a belonging on women that aren't necessarily meant to belong together. So I was wondering if you could talk a little more about that.
Yeah, I mean, working in retail, it's really, I've worked in retail. Lily obviously wrote this play while she was working at the unnamed store that Free Eden is based on. And we sort of talk about how you're not, in school growing up, you're sort of choosing your friends. But in this environment, you're all hired by someone else. And then you're all like selling things and making money, and there's an inherent competition there, and it's also in a mall where like there is the expectation of these women by the store and also by the ecosystem of the mall, and the people working in the food court of upholding a level of fashion. And I think that lends itself to the performative nature of their sisterhood. Like, we like to joke that if Apple and Cherry like moved to New York and they would run like the hottest lesbian bar in the city, but like within this particular space, I think these women's bonds can only go so far. There's an innate competition because they're working together. I also think that the thing that I relate to as well is that, like, if they just confess to each other and not to themselves in the mirror, I don't think any of this would happen, and that is, they feel like they can't show that they're not put together. They feel like they have to stuff their trauma down and use witchcraft and use the coven to exist, when really it's like there can be both.
Yeah, like back to what you were saying earlier about how it's a lot about the expectations of women is what really can make you crumble, and when it's not at all necessary.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think that that's something that, every generation of women hopefully chips away at more and more till we're not hiding, in a dressing room crying our eyes out. We're doing it together.
Yeah. So one last wee question I've got for you is just a wee fun one. You've created such like a dazzling and dynamic group of women for the on-screen coven for Fruits. Like from Lily, Lola, Victoria, Alexandra. They're a great group on screen. But if you were assembling a coven for yourself in your own life, who would you want to recruit to be with you?
I mean, I have a coven. Are you kidding? Of course. I have one. Like, I have such a incredible group of women in New York that I'm friends with that, I think that this idea of like witchcraft and magic, it's like we're doing this every day. You know, we might be like cheersing martinis, being like manifesting that for you, but we're not kidding. You know, like we're going home, we're lighting our candles. I have a witchcraft store in my neighborhood that's been there since the 90s. And I buy my candles and I get my oil and I, you know, gift it to my friends. Like I have a coven, you know, but it might be the word, I think coven or witchcraft is so synonymous with certain images and, you know, the Salem witch trials, but I think that there are ways to have that healthy belonging every day, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, for sure. I know I've got my own little coven over here as well, and
Yes, you do.
it's all about supporting each other and
Yes,
friendship.
yes, totally.
So, it was lovely to talk with you today. I really enjoyed it, and I loved the film. And I'm
Thank
now
you.
scrambling to try and find where I can read Lily's play because it's now a must. I'm obsessed with the
We can
concept.
make that happen. We can definitely, anyone who reads the play, I'm like, say the word. I'm sure we'd happily do that. Thank you for your incredibly thoughtful questions as well. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.